Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and shared with you after. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond to the questions you post. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, as well as all resources that you see shared in the chat box, will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. Additionally, we are live streaming on Facebook Live. And finally, there will be a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A, and we highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Also, before we start, I would like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week, we hope you enjoy your July 4th plans, and then join us for our rebroadcasting of two popular sessions from the past. At 12:30, we will feature a funder-to-funder conversation co-sponsored by the Center for High Impact Philanthropy, focused on how donors can help accelerate equitable learning recovery for young children. At 3 p.m. that same day, we will rebroadcast an important session co-sponsored by the Overdeck Family Foundation, focused on state investments that support children's language and literacy development. The following week, on July 12th, we'll hope you'll join us for an exciting doubleheader, starting first with a Crucible of Practice Salon, followed at 3 p.m. by a session on systems of resiliency, critical factors for decision-making. Additionally, next month gives us the chance to again host our annual virtual conference, GLR Week 2022. This conference will be from July 18th through the 22nd, and we hope you will join us for our sessions focused on the theme of bright spots and silver linings. As you can see, each day during the third week in July, we will have an exciting plenary session at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. These sessions will be combined with a series of events hosted by GLR state and community leads across the country, as well as a series celebrating the All-America City Award winners. We will also be announcing Pacesetter honorees. More information and registration will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now to get today's session going is Emily Samos, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and hello, everybody. We are so excited and really want to welcome each and every one of you. And thank you for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar titled Ready for Children, Ensuring Seamless Transitions into Kindergarten. In today's exchange of ideas, we again have the awesome opportunity to partner with New America and pick up on two previous co-sponsored discussions, which began last fall with a session titled The Kindergarten Exodus, Why, Where, and What We Can Do Now, that engaged district superintendents in an exploration of the issues related to the pandemic's impact on kindergarten enrollment and how districts were attempting to support elementary schools in meeting their youngest students' needs. We then continued on this important topic last spring with a session featuring elementary school principals taking stock and looking forward on K through third grade learning. These principles discuss enrollment, staffing, family engagement, ESSER funds, school climate, technology, social emotional development, and learning and recovery strategies. And now here we are with the school year's over and planning is underway for a successful new school year in the fall, especially for our youngest students. When we think about all of the children who will be entering kindergarten as brand new students, it is extremely important to address the issue of transition and what it takes to ensure that schools, teachers, and communities are ready for children as they enter elementary school. And so today we have the chance to hear from state, district, and school and community leaders from two diverse communities, Atlanta, Georgia, and Washoe County, Nevada, who are driving the efforts to strengthen the transition into kindergarten and make that transition a year-long supportive process for children and families. Today's panel is moderated by our great partner, Laura Bornfriend from New America's Director of Early and Elementary Education Policy, who will set the context with a review of policies and funding that support transition, as well as New America's important tools and resources available to you and to all communities. And so to get us started, let me quickly introduce Laura. She is Senior Fellow and Advisor on Early and Elementary Education with the Education Policy Program at New America, where she writes on transforming kindergarten and promotes policy and practice to strengthen the transition into kindergarten and the early grades of elementary school. So Laura, I'm very excited to turn it over to you to get us going today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. And thanks to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for this partnership. Thrilled to be here once again, and especially to talk about transitions into kindergarten, which has been the work of New America and the Early and Elementary Education Policy Program for several years now. We've worked on improving transition into kindergarten for children, families, and educators. And last year, we partnered with Education Council and published a policy toolkit for effective and supportive transitions. And then over the last 9 months, we've helped a few states and communities really take stock of how they currently support transitions into kindergarten and to develop plans and strategies to strengthen alignment and support for transitions and to promote equity in transitions. And that's what two of the communities that we'll be talking with today. New America and Ed Council really launched the work on transitions because we see transitions as an important lever for addressing children's needs during and after the pandemic. Young children, infants through age 8, right now are going to have some different kinds of needs as they move into pre-K, kindergarten, and the early grades of elementary school. And it's important to understand from families and educators what those needs are, put plans in place, direct dollars to implement those plans, move supportive policies forward, and then reassess what's working and what's not. Next slide, please. And next slide again. We all know that COVID has negatively impacted school enrollment, children's learning, and educator recruitment, retention, and well-being, especially in historically underserved communities. In the 2020-21 school year, public school enrollment fell by 3% compared to the previous year, and the declines were mostly concentrated in pre-K and kindergarten. And while enrollment went up this last school year, the 2021-22 school year, numbers were not back to pre-pandemic levels. Additionally, multiple studies have found learning losses in math and reading after the first year of the pandemic. Studies have also shown children entering pre-K, kindergarten, and the early grades missing important fine motor skills, as well as social, emotional, and other skills for learning success, such as being able to focus on a task and pay attention during instruction and get along with their peers. Mental health supports are also highly needed for children and educators. And finally, schools are finding it challenging to fill spots, especially when it comes to subs, and educator well-being has taken a dive and work-related stress is on the rise. RAND researchers recently found teachers and principals alike reporting poor well-being during this time of COVID. Next slide, please. We see transition as, that important lever for, as an important lever for counteracting these negative effects that COVID has had. But transition is about more than discrete activities that happen leading up to the school year. It's really that, as the slide says, a year-long systemic process that includes action at the state and local levels to support the process of moving from one grade level or school setting to another, such as moving from parental care to pre-K or pre-K to kindergarten, And a key focus of the transition process is ensuring alignment across pre-K, kindergarten, and the early grades. And that alignment is really that vertical and horizontal alignment across systems, aligning things like grade level expectations, discipline strategies, curricula, assessments, instructional strategies, and the list, can continue on from there. Next slide, please. In our toolkit released last summer, we talk about how policies can help meet the needs of young learners and offer several questions in the areas on this slide for leaders to consider, thinking about how to use out of school time in planning, how to promote equity, how to understand those funding and enrollment needs, how to use data to drive decision making, how to incorporate family and voice, and educator voice, and create better opportunities for engagement. Next slide, please. States and districts have an important role to play when it comes to transition. They can put supportive policies into place that address alignment, coordination, and collaboration, and transition planning. They can offer technical assistance. They can release guidance, help conduct and fund evaluations, and help to support the sharing of resources across districts and even, across states. Next slide, please. There are a number of federal, state, and other funding sources that support transition. All of the ones on this slide are there. The current and recovery dollars through ARP, the latest round of ESSER, can be used to support transition. The Every Student Succeeds Act, Title I, Title II, all dollars for things related to transition, even CCDBG, McKinney-Vento, which is focused on children experiencing homeless, and your state pre-K dollars. Many of them can support transition in different ways, as well as local philanthropy. And of course, IDEA, the Individuals with Student Disabilities in Education Act. All of these are supportive of transition into kindergarten and across the grades. And so thinking about how to leverage these dollars, blend and braid these dollars to support children and families and educators as we create those seamless transitions from one grade to the next. Next slide, please. You can learn more at New America, and this is our website here for our early ed work. We are publishing a 2.0 version of our toolkit in early September, so look out for that. It'll incorporate our learnings from this most recent school year. And we're so happy to be doing that with Education Council. And again, so happy to be here with you all partnering with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Now, on to our panel discussion. And I'd like to introduce those that we'll be speaking with today who are doing this important work on transition. And I will start with Brittany Collins. She's the Director of Promising All Atlanta Children Thrive, PACT, at Georgia Early Education Alliance for Ready Students. That's GEARS, for those of you who might know it by that name. Prior to joining GEARS, she served as the Managing Director of Program for One Goal in Metro Atlanta. Welcome, Brittany. Next, we have Angelle Cooper. She's Director in the Community Engagement Department at United Way of Greater Atlanta, where she oversees the school transition and early literacy work. During Angelle's 14 years at United Way, she has also served as the Director of Family Leadership, Director of Middle School Initiatives, and Professional Development Manager. Welcome, Angelle. Next, we have Casey Eddington. She has worked in public education for 25 years. Casey has a master's degree in administration with an emphasis in early childhood and literacy. She currently works as the kindergarten coordinator in Washoe County School District in Nevada, where she focuses on comprehensive district-wide P3 efforts. Welcome, Casey. Next slide, please. We also have Adrian Hall. She's the school transition specialist with the Atlanta Public Schools Office of Early Learning, where she manages projects such as kinder camps, school transition mini grants, and cluster transition council meetings geared towards school readiness for Atlanta's early learners. Welcome, Adrian. And finally, we have Caitlin Llewellyn. She's the education programs professional for the Nevada Department of Education, where she supports the Nevada Ready state pre-K programs and statewide birth through third grade work. Caitlin began her career in early childhood education with Opthalero Learning Head Start in Las Vegas, and she first served as a pre-K teacher and then an assistant center director. So please help me and join me in welcoming and acknowledging the expertise of these great panelists we have here today from Nevada and Atlanta. Thanks so much to all of you. You can all turn on your cameras. And I'd like to start just asking each of you to take a few minutes to really tell us about how you're using transition to work to create seamless experiences into kindergarten for children, families, and educators, how you're thinking about equity, and really reflect on why this work has been so important this year in some ways, and even more challenging during this time of COVID. And Caitlin from Nevada, let's start with you.
Thank you, Laura. So I'm going to start by giving you an overview of the state perspective of our transition work, and then I'll pass it over to Casey to discuss her team's work in our state's second largest district, Washoe County. Next slide. So I want to start by sharing with you a visual that has really helped us ground ourselves in why transition work is so essential in our state. Sam Boyd Stadium, our college stadium, fits about 35,000 people, which is the approximate number of 4-year-olds in our state. I'm sure this is the reality for many of you on the call, but only a tiny, tiny fraction of these 4-year-olds are served in either federally funded or state-funded pre-K programs. This means that the large majority of our students and families are in the community with a variety of different early learning experiences. And without intentional transition work, they're having their very first interaction with the K-12 system at the time of registration, the first day of school, or sometimes even after that. And as you can see here, these numbers are pre-pandemic, and we're still now trying to recuperate with enrollment in these preschool programs. So an even smaller portion of these students are being served now. Next slide. So in beginning to support statewide transition work, we've thought through a few approaches that tackle the broader pre-K through third grade spectrum. So last year, we sponsored our first ever Nevada cohort to participate in Christy Cower's P3 Leadership Academy at the University of Colorado, Denver. And our second cohort has just begun their coursework for this year's program. We see this as an opportunity to invest in and build capacity in our elementary school leaders to become P3 champions and better understand early childhood best practice, which is a huge part of transition work. The Nevada-specific cohort model convenes these leaders on a regular basis throughout the year to contextualize the learnings from the program and apply that to Nevada's specific needs. We're leveraging both Title IIA and ARP ESSER dollars for this project. Another initiative we've begun investing in is vertically aligning best practices in curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Our developmentally appropriate kindergarten cohorts are statewide professional learning opportunities for kindergarten teachers to learn about DAP and how to apply it to their pedagogy. We're also working on creating a Nevada DAP kindergarten position statement and implementation guide, which we think will really set the tone moving forward to help support our kindergarten teachers and administrators in advocating for and implementing practices rooted in child development. This work is being funded through ARP ESSER dollars as well as leftover PDG funds. And finally, we've been really fortunate to partner with Education Council, who's been providing technical assistance to 2 of our school districts, which I'll talk about in the next few slides. So Ed Council's TA work with us began with a statewide informational webinar to get stakeholders interested in and talking about transitions. We then conducted focus groups with districts to hear about strengths and needs within our state's communities. This information was then used to develop our Nevada transition guide. From there, Washoe and Lyon County graciously agreed to participate in a pilot project to implement strategies from our guide and contextualize them according to their unique district context. Next slide. So this will be dropped in the chat, but our state guide has several actionable resources and steps districts and programs can take to support families and students in their transition, including what each phase of this planning might look like depending on the context. Next slide. Lyon and Washoe County have both completed a self-assessment, goal setting and planning, and conducted focus groups. And currently, district-specific implementation guides are being developed to guide transition work on a more granular level for educators and administrators. Next slide. The implementation guide is organized by time of year and includes different approaches and events, both virtual and in person. And I think one of the challenges I'm sure you've all experienced as well over the past few years was closed campuses, which really made us rethink those more traditional relationship building opportunities with families that we were previously used to, again, which is a huge piece of transition. So I think we now recognize the value of continuing some of these newer practices that we learned throughout the pandemic that did work well, which includes providing a variety of options for families and multiple access points depending on family need and preference. So those are reflected within this guide as well. And then I'll pass it over to Casey to talk about some of the work specific to Washoe and her projects that came about from the Early Childhood Advisory Council in Nevada.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Caitlin. So we were able to write and get accepted for a $30,000 very small 2-year grant. It's an early childhood advisory grant. And within that, year one, we really focused on building a collective vision between the pre-K and kindergarten community. So talking about public and private coming together to have conversations that we haven't had before. And then year two is really to implement that vision and put that into place. Some of the ideas that we have already talked about and are written into the grant are home visits, model classrooms, and then really furthering that high quality P3 alignment. And one of the things that we did, we're going to talk a little bit later in another question, but I wanted to just kind of tease you here. We did a pre-K to kindergarten collaborative. It was with 50 educators, 25 from the pre-K side and 50 from the kindergarten through 3rd grade side. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. Next slide. The other thing that we focused on, and I think Caitlin was alluding to it, is that we are working on communication. And 2 things came about. We didn't have a platform that we could all utilize. And so we decided to use Teams as our platform for both the public and pre-K educators. And then we're also working to improve our Washoe County website. So now when families go to inquire about kindergarten transition, there's a family tab right there on that homepage that'll be really easy. And we also have a provider in school tab so that all of our resources are listed in one easy to find location on our website. Next. Back to you, Laura.
Oh, and one more slide.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to share kind of a reflection that we've had in doing this work. One of the things I've had to come to terms with in the aftermath of the pandemic is that we've had to really navigate the sense of urgency versus intentionality. We were moving at a quite rapid pace because of the critical nature of transition work. And this certainly enabled us to lay important groundwork and set things in motion. But now that things have slowed a bit, we have had the opportunity to reflect on necessary intentional adjustments to our implementation to best pursue our goals. So I wanted to share this tool that we plan to use in Washoe that was adapted from Portland Public Schools. You may have seen it in some variation before, but it's a set of questions to think through programs, practices, policies, and any decisions that you and your team make. And we plan to use this tool to examine each element of our transition work that's already in place and our future work to ensure everything's grounded in equity and to make changes accordingly if it's not meeting that. Okay, back to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin and Casey, for that. I think that, bringing that those questions to reflect on are a good reminder to everyone to think how they can check and be sure that their approach is meeting the needs of all children and families, and doing that in an equitable way, because those needs are going to be different. Okay, I'd like to turn it over and talk with the Atlanta team. And Brittany, if you could go first, and then we'll have Angel and Adrian speak about the work. Thanks.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Collins, and I serve as the director of Promise All Atlanta Children Thrive, also known as PACT, and that is an initiative of GEARS, which is a statewide organization. And PACT really is a citywide alliance of public and private partners working together to improve outcomes for young children. And while our work focuses on a range of strategies as it relates to early learning, I'm really excited to talk about our work with school transitions. And I think the headline there is our goal is to ensure that our partners at Atlanta Public Schools or early learning providers are not the only entities in the city focusing on school transition. So my role is, facilitating collaboration between school districts, partners like United Way, or even community-based organizations and funders to really elevate the issues that we are focusing on. And in this case, it's school transitions and ensuring that our young people are ready for kindergarten when they show up. Another is really thinking about policies. So what are some of the policies that could either accelerate our work or potentially are barriers preventing us from moving forward with our work? And last, it's raising and aligning funding. So identifying whether there are public or private funding streams available that our partners who are directly implementing programming can leverage. So I have the pleasure of sort of being that neutral convener and providing space for us to tackle either key challenges that we're working on, celebrate some of our wins, but I think more importantly is holding space. So we're focusing on this collectively. And again, I always stress ensuring that our partners who serve children are not the only ones thinking about these challenges, because one of our headlines is it takes a city or make the pact. And if we want to ensure that all of Atlanta's children thrive, everyone has to think about this issue, whether you are an elected official, a funder, or, like Adrian, you may work at the school district yourself. So it's been exciting to work with our partners and convene this collective table so we can share resources and, more importantly, reduce duplicity around the city and streamline communication and resources for our families.
Angel?
Yes, good afternoon. At United Way of Greater Atlanta, we have realized the importance of school transition and have offered some sort of program for over the 15 years that I've been at United Way. The current program is called School Transition Summit Initiative, and it is offered to all of the 13 counties that we serve. Next slide. The program is based on a couple of best practices that have run throughout the various programs that we've offered. The main one being that school transition is a process, not one or two or three activities, and that it involves everybody: school, community, family, and child care center. Next slide. Again, this is open to all 13 counties, and it can be a school system, early childhood center, or a community or other organization that is involved. Some of the sessions we include are an overview of best practices. We've also developed several computer-based trainings to help the agency or school system introduce the concept to folks that they're trying to recruit to be on their school transition teams. And we also teach them how to facilitate a community cafe so that they can also engage their stakeholders. Next slide. We offer each entity in the program free coaching to help them get their team together and develop their school transition plan. And we also pay for admission for all of their team members to enjoy a 2-day summit, which we do with NBCDI, and we offer a school transition tract and also a follow-up to those track sessions to enhance their work. Next slide. All of this is free of charge to whoever wants to be involved, but we do have certain criteria where they have to attend all the sessions, have to complete the computer-based training, have a team leader, a team, and eventually, next slide, a team plan. They also have to commit to doing a community cafe and participate in whatever evaluations we have going on. The program overall, it's been going on for about 5 years and it's been very successful. And I think the greatest challenge that we've had, like many others, is that during the pandemic, we had to go virtual, and the greatest challenge was probably changing the community cafe to virtual format, but we have done that successfully. What we're still working on, I think, out of all of the different stakeholders, our parent population sort of dropped off, but understandably so, since parents had a lot of other things on their plates. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. And Adrian, will you tell us about what Atlanta Public Schools is doing?
Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Adrian Hall, and I am the School Transition Specialist with Atlanta Public Schools Office of Early Learning. And I'm very fortunate to be able to collaborate with Brittany and Angel from Gears and the United Way to provide supports to some of the programming that we're doing for transition in our district. Next slide, please. And within Atlanta Public Schools, transition is all about building those relationships, relationships with our parents, relationships with the community, relationships with the schools, and relationships with the early learning community as a whole. And so I just provided a few of the 3 major initiatives that we're using to support those transitions and building relationships. Kinder Camp is one of those transition activities that we're using as a way to just build confidence for our children as they are making that change from the smaller early learning environment, maybe a center, and into the public school arena. It just provides an additional emotional learning and social learning environment for those children to become acclimated to school and become comfortable in that environment before they actually begin day 1 in school. So with Kinder Camp, it's a lot of building relationships between parents and teachers, and we know that parent and teacher relationship is so great at that stage of the game. We also know that building the relationships between the student and the teacher is great at that moment. So Kinder Camp provides that opportunity for that to take place. And it's a wonderful way for our parents to relieve those anxieties of going into a building that they aren't very familiar with for their children as they enter the first day of school. So that's a major relationship that we're supporting and we're building. The second one is that school transition mini grant. And the school transition mini grant is an opportunity for the early learning centers that surround all of APS schools, as well as the APS schools themselves. They have an opportunity to apply for grant funds to support any type of transition to kindergarten activity that they choose to do. And the goal is also building relationships again, to get those early learning centers and the schools working collaboratively on a common project, which helps to support those kids. Because we know that those kids that are coming from those early learning centers, will be coming into the APS school system. So we want to provide opportunities for those entities to work collaboratively together to provide activities. They do anything from doing parent meetings. Maybe a teacher from the public school is going to come over to the early learning center to do a meeting just to let the parents know about the public school. We have schools that visit early learning centers, and early learning centers visit the schools. So again, it's another way to just establish collaboration and just that more of an established relationship so that the schools and the centers have that common goal of getting our kids ready for school. And then lastly, the School Transition Council, which is where we take leadership from the public schools and leadership from the early learning center environment, as well as community leaders that are major stakeholders to come together to work collaboratively so that they can have those conversations, whether it's about enrollment, things that we can do to boost our enrollment, things that we can do to support our English language learners. We're all talking together and we're bridging that gap so that we can make sure that we're speaking the same language and that relationship helps to make our children ready for school and that our community is ready for school. Because we know that it's just not the schools and the early learning centers that are responsible for it. It's a whole community effort. And once the community is together and we're all together, we have a common goal of support. So these are just the three of those major things that we're doing. We do a lot of outreach with utilizing our government agencies and our community agencies where we're just pinpointing different areas that we need to reach in order to provide transitions for our students. So those are the few things that I have listed for today. And again, it's just all towards building those relationships to support our families.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks. Been hearing a lot about the role of community and Brittany. So I have another question for you and your role as PACT director. And in your remarks, you mentioned duplicity, and I think that's a challenge for a lot of communities, a lot of good organizations doing similar things and not knowing what each other are doing. And so, can you just talk about how community partners can really come together on transition? How you've been able to do that in Atlanta and the different roles that they can play in transition and coordination across pre-K and kindergarten?
No, for sure. I think one of the most simple ways is an ongoing convening. So we started our convenings, Adrian, I believe it was in early 2020. I think groups had sometimes they would meet right before the summer, but we established a regular meeting cadence, and that was right during the height of the pandemic. And I think the question there was, what are you doing? No one knows how to do this. So it was simple as sharing policies. Like, what are some of the policies you're putting in place? How can we ensure that if a family shows up at Atlanta Public Schools or YMCA of Metro Atlanta, that the policies are sort of similar? Because we heard that families were sort of stressed out and didn't really know what to do. We tapped on our community-based organization. So rather than Atlanta Public Schools or a provider with limited capacity, whether they start to do this new thing, the question was, who's already doing that and how can we bring them to this table? An example of that is we had something called learning spaces, which are spaces where families gather, and families may not be in formal childcare or connected to a school. So we said, can we go there where families already gather? Can we ask the church if they have a food drive? Can we go to that space to determine if there is a way to give our resources directly to where families are going versus creating this new event and telling families, oh, come to us? I think the question for us was always, how can we invert the burden for families? So we know how important school transitions is. We knew all the research, and we also knew that we weren't reaching families that we needed to connect with. So we had to get really innovative. I think another really cool example, it was recent, is Adrian shared a lot about the professional development that United Way of Greater Atlanta provides to the region. We were in our planning and we were thinking about, oh, let's like plan a school transition seminar or a PD. And it's like, well, no, let's actually connect them to the existing PD at United Way. It sounds very simple, but for us being in those rooms, you would have had a separate professional development. That means resources would have went to that, capacity and expertise, if we weren't actually focused on who's doing it well and how can we connect our providers, our community-based organizations, and our parents to existing work that's already happened. I think that's also important for the funding community, which is where I sit. Sometimes I sit intermediary, to be able to show just how interconnected our work is. So when we have funders that's willing to invest in school transitions, they see just how far their dollars are leveraged, because these aren't isolated strategies, but they're really all connected together. So it's helped us from the community standpoint to being clearly communicating what we're trying to do to the public, and also our ability to attract additional dollars because our work is coordinated. And we are working really hard to not do the same thing and targeting the exact same population.
I think that's a really important point you make about leveraging dollars and not, reinventing the wheel, every time, because a lot of communities have lots of gaps and holes, and, taking the time to really understand what those are and how to deploy dollars, regardless of the organization, but figuring out how to take on and fill those holes and who's best suited to do that. I think you've laid out how that's working in Atlanta. Casey, I have a question for you. So you, in your remarks, really talked about the school district taking, a leadership role in transition and what you've been able to do. And I'm curious, how have you been able to also engage some community partners, in that work, and how have you thought about, or what further engagement would you like to be able to do with partners in Washoe?
What Brittany just said was something that we discovered really early on. We needed to get the right people on that Washoe County kindergarten transition team. And so that is probably our most successful project right now. We had Washoe County Licensing, United Way, Children's Cabinet, Head Start, and then also community childcare providers. So it could be like a neighborhood school or a small child care center that participated, getting everybody to the table to talk about what they're currently doing and our vision for next steps really helped. Something that United Way, they started early with this partnership with the school district. Something that we are trying to pilot right now in a very small way is having volunteers come into our kindergarten classrooms that first week of school. And what we're asking them to do is to help kids with self-help skills. So you probably all have been into a lunchroom where it's chaotic and it's the first week of kindergarten, and helping kids peel oranges or teaching them how to open up the ketchup packets, things like that. There's a critical need for support during that first week. And so that's something that United Way has really stepped up, and we're doing it at just a very small pilot program. But that need came from a focus group that we did with Ed Council, where the teachers said we could really use some extra hands during that first week. So that's one thing that United Way has done. And also we are doing a lot of joint kindergarten registration events. I think, Laura, you alluded to it earlier that our numbers are still down, and Caitlin talked about that we're still trying to recoup those numbers. So it's been really helpful that United Way funded some fence banners for every single elementary school to promote kindergarten registration. And then we're doing those community events. Children's Cabinet is doing something really unique as well. we have this kindergarten statewide cohort. And as part of that, we did a year 1 of learning, a year 2 of learning, and then year 3 is where we invite teachers into other teachers' classrooms. And we really are looking at the classroom environment for a kindergartner, thinking about what it looks like in a pre-K program and how different does that look in a kindergarten program, really trying to transform those environments. And so Children's Cabinet donated $5,000 worth of flexible seating to transform what that may look like for children. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is we have been very intentional about selecting our high need schools and a neighborhood of schools to support first. So Washoe County is quite large. We have about 65,000 students in our whole district. And so really targeting 8 schools. And then we, from there, those elementary schools, the principals mapped out who their feeder pre-K programs are, providers. And then we invited them to come to that pre-K and kindergarten collaborative where we had that grant to fund us coming together to create our own vision. And so we've started small, but we have found that that has really led us to greater success. So prior to that event, the state provided us, and Ed Council created a 2-hour asynchronous professional learning so that we had common vocabulary and common knowledge about transition to kindergarten. People who engaged in this as teams, whether they were providers or kindergarten teams at our public elementary schools, they were each given a $50 Amazon gift card for their time. And then when they came to the event, the collaborative event with 25 pre-K from that sector, providers, and then 25 from the kindergarten sector. When they came to that event, they also were given a $50 Amazon gift card for their participation. So that has been really nice to be able to, and we provided dinner, which we never do. And so it was a really nice event. And I think it honored everybody as educators. So those were some of the ways that we have involved our community.
Thank you, Casey. And I love, how you're bringing kindergarten educators and pre-K educators together. And I know, Adrian, you mentioned that in your remarks too about really reaching out and engaging early learning centers in the transition to K. And I'd like you to kind of talk more about how you're doing that. And I know that's a challenge for a lot of communities, even, identifying centers, knowing, how to reach out, how to bring school leaders and, early learning centers together. So you could talk about what's been successful and challenging for you in that.
Yes, Laura. So that has been one of the biggest challenges with engaging early learning centers. The best and the most successful way that I've been able to connect with them is through the cluster transition councils. And what those transition cluster councils are is so APS has 9 clusters associated with the district. And so we started with maybe the clusters with the most needs and identified the early learning centers that surround each of those schools. And it in the beginning, it had been just me knocking on doors and ringing doorbells saying, hey, I'm the school transition specialist. We're offering all of these things. I want to be a support to you and your families as you're becoming the families within the APS district. So, and that, I mean, some are very receptive, and then there's some that are kind of like, who are you, young lady? So, but it was a great way to, and it is a great way to get to know the community. I think the biggest thing with the council is that they also pinpoint other centers that they bring in or that they know and that we can reach out to when I can reach out to make that connection. And so it's more of a group effort to reach those early learning centers. I also reach out to like our government agency DECAL, who has a list of all of those early learning centers, and I partner with them and they help me to maybe identify some of those centers within the zip codes of the school and just kind of make those connections because they have connections as well. So they've been able to kind of introduce me to those centers and be a bridge to a connection for transition. So, I mean, it's a lot of visits and, you know, just being a face in the community for them. It's about leveraging the community partners that we have in order to bridge the gap of communication. We also have early learning ambassadors within our district that have been very helpful. They're outside in the community and they're making those connections that I've been able to leverage their help with making connections as well. So it's just, you know, again, about building relationships and finding those connections to open the doors. COVID kind of derailed some of the progress that we were making at one point. But with COVID, you know, with the numbers going down, we're able to do a little bit of more collaboration. Our meetings were quarterly. So we would get together and just kind of meet and discuss anything that we needed to do and have like maybe common goals and find ways that we can support one another. So we've had to switch to some virtual things, which has been great with making connections and greetings. So it's always a challenge collaborating. And the other part of that is that, you know, we never want to be in a role where we're, well, competition. A lot of early learning centers have pre-K and, you know, just bridging that gap. And we're here to support. We're not here to be a competition to you. We're here to, you know, see how we can help each other with boosting enrollment numbers, things like that. So we try to pinpointing something that's common, that we have in common, and bring it together as something that we can work together collectively, so that it's not that, you know, we're a school system and we're just doing enrollment and you have your center and you're doing enrollment. We're working together collaboratively to help those numbers. And that has helped to bridge those gaps as well. Just finding that common ground to work from.
Thank you. And you've shared a lot of good strategies. And I think a good tip to use the state agency, you know, because they know the early learning centers in the community, and that's a resource for just even, you know, identifying them. And I think, you know, I've heard, you know, on this call, but also from others, just while, you know, COVID has brought a lot of challenges, we've all gotten a lot more comfortable and just, you know, have a lot more access to online tools. And in some cases, you know, that enables the participation for more people who might not be able to be in person. So, you know, I think it's great to hear finding that right, you know, balance of the in-person, but still using those virtual tools when they make sense to do that. Angela, I want to come back to you. And I know that you mentioned, you know, the United Way's transition initiative is multiple counties. And I know that you've worked in Clayton County and in other counties and have had some you know, successes with transition efforts in those. And I, you know, was wondering if you could tell us more about those successes.
Sure. Initially, even though we serve 13 counties, a lot of my work was with Atlanta Public Schools and Clayton County Schools. And our United Way is trying to get away from direct service. So as a result of that, I passed on the School Transition Council in APS to Adrian, and she's pretty much covered that. And in Clayton County, instead of passing it on to the school system, we passed the School Transition Council on to a nonprofit that is a nonprofit arm of one of the early learning centers in Clayton County. So the difference being, I think, the nonprofit is more grassroots and was already working with many of the other early learning centers as well as the school system. And so some of the challenges that Adrian mentioned with the School Transition Council have not been reflected in the Clayton County Council. And I think it's really because, it is grassroots. They know the community, they know the early learning centers and community organizations already. And, maybe it's also, Adrian mentioned knocking on doors and people being not so sure whether they wanted to participate or not. And so by it not being United Way and it not being the school system, but it being this organization instead, I think they've had a little more success with their School Transition Council and getting whatever the activity or whatever the programming, getting them to be involved.
Thank you for that. And I think, that's an important point and just another value of partnerships, because there are organizations in the communities, or Adrian, you mentioned Atlanta's community ambassadors is playing that role, knowing the families, knowing where they are, and how to engage them. And I know over the last, several years, but rebuilding trust with families to encourage them to, see schools and programs as a place that that they want to engage with and feel good about engaging with is just the work of all community partners and schools right now. So good to see some ways that that's happening in these communities. Caitlin, I wanted to come back to you, and this isn't the question that I was going to ask you, although we'll get to that one too. But I thought that you made just a really good case for what states can do to support transition. I think I just hear a lot that transition, there's not really a lot that states can do because it's such a local issue. But you just laid out, I think, a lot of ways that states can be involved and still enable that contextualization to meet local needs. So I guess just respond or reflect on that. And then I'd love for you to talk more about the developmentally appropriate cohorts. Thanks.
Yeah, I think especially when we got started, I was very intimidated because early learning priorities are often outshined by other existing priorities within the states, right? But I think what I found is that starting small is completely acceptable, and successes from starting small can certainly be scaled up and again contextualized depending on different community needs. But I think to respond to that, Laura, something that I'm excited about that addresses that is taking the stance as a state to put out a developmentally appropriate kindergarten position statement and an implementation guide. So our educators and administrators that deeply believe in best practices for young children have kind of this foundation to work off of, and that they can use to kind of advocate for moving towards this way of instruction and curriculum that I think we haven't always been doing for the past few years. And so again, just starting small is completely acceptable, and meeting districts and programs where they are. There are some districts that are doing incredible things and they've been doing this for a while, and there's other ones that are just getting started. And I think as a state agency, being able to partner with those districts and to help them see what strengths they do have in place and building off of that is a really great way to approach that. And then to speak more specifically to our developmentally appropriate kindergarten cohorts. So like I said before, these are professional learning opportunities, as well as really just a network for our kindergarten educators to both better understand high quality early learning practices and how to apply that to their instruction, but then also this network of relationship building and connecting kindergarten teachers with others across the state, right? They're working under the same set of standards for early learning. And so orienting them towards each other and allowing that space for relationship building, I think is important too. And then I also think the cohorts have given our educators the tools to advocate for transforming practices, like I just mentioned, within their school community, that smaller school community, and they can have those harder conversations with administrators who might not yet understand the foundation of developmentally appropriate practice, which we know, as we've heard from our educators, this is a huge barrier when their leaders don't necessarily understand that foundation. And just a little bit more about the cohorts, the specifics. We're now in year 2 of this initiative, and we've had 3 cohorts thus far with almost 90 teachers total, and they're representing almost every school district in Nevada, which is really exciting. And these cohorts are held completely virtually and were designed by a national expert. I'm sure you've heard of her, Eva Phillips, who's done some really incredible work with GAP in North Carolina. And to accompany these cohorts, we've also hosted additional statewide professional learning opportunities through an event called Make May About Play. And in our guide in the chat, you'll see flyers for these events that were hosted. But this included 9 sessions focused on developmentally appropriate practice for preschool through 1st grade. And it covered specific ideas to support alignment and best practice. And so this event, the registration filled up very quickly, which indicated to us there's this great desire and need for continued opportunities like these in the future. So I think we're trying to use this interest and momentum to guide our work in developing the statewide position statement and implementation guide.
Thank you. So I have a question for, we've talked a lot about successes and what's gone well, but I'm curious also about the challenges that you're all still grappling with, especially as you think about the coming school year and the needs of children as they transition back into the year in the fall. And whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
Well, I think I already mentioned that parent involvement has dropped off during the pandemic. The other piece that I see in Clayton County, but I'm sure it's not just in Clayton County, is the fact that I mentioned the umbrella organization that is doing the School Transition Council. They also oversee small grants to several early learning centers to do school transition work. And when they became the umbrella organization, I increased the number of early learning centers that they could fund. And it's not a lot, it's 10. I increased it to 10. And they actually had to give some of the money back because the centers felt like, even though school transition was important and they wanted the money, they were inundated by so many other things. And also, once the pandemic lifted up a little bit, they had to deal with things that had been postponed, like audits and finding staff and so on and so forth. So they were just like, I'm sorry, but I can't do it, which is unfortunate. That, you know, usually there's not money out there, but now there's money out there and they're saying we can't use the money because we can't do this right now.
Yeah, no, and that's a real concern, even with, you know, you're talking about great local dollars, but with federal dollars coming down, you know, being able to get them out of the door has been a challenge in some places. What else?
I can build off of that. That was just making me think that just this need to kind of make transition work outside of the Department of Education a statewide initiative that is a priority as well within our other districts that aren't receiving our technical assistance. I think, as I alluded to before, there are so many competing priorities within education, right? But what I'm hoping we can do, and is also something I'm challenged by, is helping people see that these other initiatives kindergarten transition work sets a really strong foundation and is in support of those other initiatives, right? Like chronic absenteeism is something we're working really hard on in our state, stronger family engagement. All of those initiatives are, kindergarten transition is in service of those. So I'm really trying to figure out a way to help invest folks to see that it's not in addition to those other priorities, it's laying the foundation to set those other priorities up for success.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a way, I hope that, everyone out there is thinking about transition and programs or activities or strategies that are put into place, because it doesn't have to be just one more layer, one more thing to do. It really, thinking about transition strategically and how it can leverage the work that you're already doing or align with your priorities is important. Anything else we want to throw out there? Because those who are listening in, I'm going to ask you in just a moment. I think particularly around family engagement, what are you finding that's working? I know building trust and family engagement has been a challenge in a lot of communities right now with COVID and just all of the things that are happening in schools. So if you've had successes, and would like to share those in the chat, I invite you to do that as well. But for our panel, any other challenges you'd like to talk through?
I know with COVID, the biggest challenges, at least for the summer, with some of our summer programs, is definitely the enrollment piece and getting seats filled for summer. And we've also had those challenges with teacher shortages as also. A lot of our teachers, they've come off of having a really rigorous year, stressful year for the parents as well, with dealing with COVID and the uncertainties of whether schools will remain open, things like that. So it has definitely affected enrollment and the enrollment numbers. The encouraging thing about it is that our numbers for pre-K are on the uprise, and we're hoping that by August, September, those numbers will be up. And the things that are reflected within APS are also reflected in our early learning centers with their challenges with enrollment and teacher shortages and things like that. So, as we think about transition, we're always thinking, outside the box and what we can do to reach those families that are the most unreachable, and bring those in-home providers into the fold so that they're understanding, they're not feeling left out or they're feeling isolated, thinking about more things that we can do to make those families feel included, especially our homeless families and those things. So, as we think about enrollment, we're also focusing on our families that we need to pay more attention to and reach across the board.
Great. We've got a lot of good audience questions come in, and I've seen a couple of times people asking to hear more about the ambassador program. And see, there's one. Well, let's talk about the ambassador program in Atlanta first. So, Brittany, do you want to take that one?
So our ambassador program is really a partnership between Gears and Atlanta Public School. And it started from what's the easiest way to engage parents and better understand how parents want to receive information. And it always points back to community. The best way to solve a challenge in the community is actually to seek their expertise. And I think it's always fascinating. We may have all these jobs and titles and doing this work for a long time, but if we want to understand what's happening in the Vine City neighborhood, we should probably ask residents that live in the Vine City neighborhood. So that's what the ambassadors are. We contract with the ambassadors. They are trained. Gears leads the training, but we call partners ranging from United Way or others to really help educate them on the importance of early learning, arm them with advocacy tools and techniques. And I think most importantly, we look to the ambassadors to say, okay, if we want parents to understand the importance of the early years, how do we need to disseminate that information? So the ambassadors help craft our deliverables, whether it's our flyers. The ambassadors are also the ones distributing that information in the community. So an example may be, now that we are preparing for pre-K recruitment, which is top of mind for everyone, YMCA or APS or any other childcare program will send their flyers to the ambassador, and they may attend a community event or a community association meeting, and they'll have a table. And as folks are walking by or gathering in a particular space, the ambassadors are leading that exchange. And I think it's important because the ambassadors, one, are from the community, so they're more likely to stop to say, hey, what is this, or how can I support? The ambassadors also may see family members in spaces like church or the grocery store. And again, I think the importance is ensuring it's a trusted community voice. I think we have, as much as we want to improve community engagement, we have to understand the experiences that families have had with educational institutions in general, and finding out ways to increase that trust. And communication lines has been important for us. And the last thing I'll add is they give us lots of feedback. There's one, I remember I was first hired and there was a flyer, it was a scholarship program, and we had all these slots of free childcare scholarships, and we had lots of availability. And the ambassadors looked at a flyer and they said, no one's reading that. Like, that's why your program isn't full. You have one page full of small letters. You need to slash it in half. And I thought everything on that flyer was important, and it wasn't. And they really guided us on what does the collateral need to look like. After doing that, within maybe 2 to 3 weeks, the program was filled up. So if you want to do an ambassador program, I think it's important that, yes, they're a trusted voice, but you also have to be willing to learn from and shift your strategies based on the feedback that they provide behind the scenes as well.
So the big takeaways I'm hearing are: learn from people in the communities, go to trusted voices, and pay them for their time. Don't ask for volunteers.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have a good question from Megan Schneider. This is it's a different thinking about transition, not into K, but do your organizations focus on transition or think about transition into pre-K for 3 or 4-year-olds? And can you use the same content but gear it to a pre-K audience? It seems like, Megan says, it seems like for children participating in public school pre-K, that is the big moment of transition for those families. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, in APS, we have a big pre-K program. So we do focus transition in terms of going into pre-K as well. And some of the schools that we made, for the summer, we do have our summer STP program that does have a rising K for our early learners who are Spanish-speaking families. So we do have recruitment needs that we do, and we go out and do different types of recruitment to pinpoint pre-K and early learning centers that we do pinpoint for them as well in terms of getting them ready for school and outreach. We also use the school transition mini grant is also a great way that we pinpoint that transition into pre-K as well as transition into an early learning center. So there's collaboration in that way to do so. So that, you know, those two programs are what we focus on as well.
Thank you. Casey, you look like you might want to jump in too.
Well, I think this is one of the struggles with being a large school district. So we have a pre-K director, and that pre-K director is definitely supporting her programs with transitioning families into the pre-K public programs. But as far as my understanding of what those are, it's very limited. So I feel like I'm probably not the best person to speak to, but I do know that she works really hard. It is easier, slightly easier to support families with transition into pre-K because there's that expectation that families are involved and they're dropping kids off. And so you're seeing them much more frequently. But I would say that that has been much more of a problem since we've had the pandemic, where our campuses have been closed and families haven't had the opportunity to communicate on that regular basis with dropping kids off, volunteering in the classroom, and those kinds of things. But I'm so sorry, I don't have better answers to your question.
No, that's okay. And maybe we can engage your pre-K director at another time on that. So Heather Lee asked a question about libraries as partners. Have you engaged libraries, and if so, how?
Speaking aspirationally, and I'll hand it over to someone if this is something you're already doing, but part of our district plans really looked at that community organization outreach and embedding transition work into those great practices that they already have in place. Things like Home Depot or the local libraries have all these great early learning experiences and events where they work with families. So I think one thing we're hoping to do is work with them on a little bit of a deeper level to communicate transition specific information.
One of the great things that Washoe County is doing, and this might actually be statewide, I'm not sure, Caitlin, you can jump in on this, but when you register your child for the very first time into Washoe County School District in Nevada, you have the opportunity to say you would like a library card. And I don't know if other states do this, but it's a genius idea to right away make that partnership between our community libraries and our schools. The other thing, many of our schools have a Washoe County Public Library right on campus. So it's a joint library that the school uses during the day, but then it's open to the community in the evening times, and they have technology available, and those are at schools with the highest need. And so it's really well targeted. And there's one more thing. Oh, United Way. When we meet with United Way, they do a great job of connecting all of our community members together. And the library services has a representative on that team. And so when we were really working hard on kindergarten registration, we put together a flyer that was hung at the library and also sent out, but bookmarks that said, register your child for kindergarten. And so little things like this, just because we're in the same room together and talking about critical needs for each of our areas, we can support each other.
Thank you. I know we also had a question earlier come in about dual language learners and how to really support transition and to help families make decisions about placement for their children if they are dual language learners. Can anyone respond to that?
I can talk very briefly on this. I feel like this is an area of need for our district. We really try hard to have information and resources in the family's home language as well as registration processes, but it's difficult. It's an area that we could improve upon. We do offer like orientation events where families are invited, especially post-pandemic, onto our campuses where they can get to know other families, and we can create a little bit of a play date scenario so that kids can start to get to know each other before the first day of school. And then as far as once kids get into school, we really try to have routines and schedules that we follow every day with picture support, gestures, those kinds of things. But as far as our system, I would say that we have a long way to go, and there are definitely other states to look for as far as the exemplar.
Adrian?
In APS, we have our world languages department, who they're very supportive in all of our recruitment needs and efforts. We are always reaching out to them. They're present during any open house, any schools, if they're in need of any translation. They're very present within each of our APS schools, and then within the Office of Early Learning, when we have our big recruitment initiatives and we're doing enrollment for pre-K, we always have their support to provide any type of translation or any type of one-on-one assistance with parents if they need to determine what type of needs that they might, their child may have in terms of language. So they're always accessible to us. We can call them and they'll provide us with their support, whether it's translation, whether it's in-person assistance that we need with one-on-one parent needs. So we always look to them for our definite support.
Nancy Hoth has asked about data systems, and this is specific for Atlanta, but it also gets at a larger question about data and how data can be used to support transition. But the question for Atlanta is there a common pre-K database for private and public programs that Atlanta public schools can access for kindercamp and registration?
So registration, we're included within APS Summer. So registration for kindercamp is also advertised on our website, where parents can also go to that website to do registration information, and then it's matriculated to the schools to do enrollment. So we do have access to the APS website for supports in order to gain students for kindercamp, and then advertising as well.
And then what about, others, and Adrian, you can answer as well. What data do you wish you had? What do you think is needed to better support transitions across, particularly pre-K or into kindergarten, but at other grade levels as well?
I think one of the biggest things that our teachers always talk about, if they've had the opportunity, excuse me, to collaborate with early learning center teachers so that they can talk about the things that are important and make sure that they're on the same page together, some type of joint, maybe professional learning or just an opportunity to sit down and speak with families. It would be nice in a perfect world to be able to take information and information on students that they have that are in an early learning center and just transfer that into the school system so that a kindergarten teacher or a pre-K teacher would have that data on that child or information or background on that child, or even if the parent can be able to share that information. But in order to share, we don't have that mechanism yet in sharing that type of information. We do have our state provider that when the students are doing their work sampling and things like that, that data is captured in their system, but it's not something that's transferred from an early learning center environment into the school. So it would always be a great thing to be able to have the teachers collaborate in that way to talk about some of the milestones that maybe the kids are doing in this particular classroom and they're moving into kindergarten. So those are the things that we would love to bridge those gaps on as well.
I have one more question for everyone. What do you need from, or what would you like from state or federal government to really strengthen, deepen, or expand the work you're doing? So I know I'm thinking, Brittany, like how do you expand or replicate, in some ways what's happening in Atlanta across other places in Georgia. You don't have to respond to that if you don't want to, but what do you need? What do you want from the state or federal government to strengthen what you're already doing? Anyone can jump in first.
I'll share from the perspective of really local government. Atlanta is really benefiting right now from a mayoral administration that is focusing on early learning. So when I think about the impact of communities, one, it's being just using your voice to share what folks are doing. I think often when we think about K-12, sometimes pre-K gets left out, or the early learning conversation. And that's such a unique population that has a different set of policies. So I think just one is providing space for that unique population, both the parents as well as the providers, to elevate their issues and actually respond to some of the challenges that they are lifting up. I think local government has a unique role, and certainly states have a unique role. I see in the chat, folks are talking about flexible funding. That's always a challenge, but also ensuring that folks are able to use the funding in ways that matter or best fits the needs of their community. Adrian speaks about this a lot, but some of the challenges that City of Atlanta providers or school district may be facing are different in Clayton County. And those are, it takes 20 minutes to get from each part because communities just have a different set of issues. So the flexibility to respond to those unique issues would be helpful.
Anyone else? While you're thinking, I'll just say that for our audience, there is a chat open right now to get your feedback on this session. So if you have time to respond, please do so.
Laura, since I have the platform, I guess I'll just share my aspiration that on the federal level, I think, providing universal high quality pre-K would, of course, increase families' options and choices that sets them up for success within this transition period. Until we get there, I think on the state level, I just think for our state and other states to really understand what I talked about earlier, that this is literally setting that foundation for those other initiatives and priorities we talk a lot about in our state reading. Read by Grade 3 is one of our programs. And so it's not read at Grade 3, right? It's by Grade 3. And so focusing on these transition efforts early and working with students and families early on is what's going to get them there and help us achieve our goals. So just kind of shifting priorities and helping everyone be invested in this on a larger scale.
Prevention over remediation, right? Great. Well, I will stop there and thank all of you for joining, all of the participants for joining the session, all of you panelists for sharing your insights, and I will turn it back over to Emily.
Thank you. Yes, what an incredible discussion. And I want to say thank you so much to all of our great panelists. Laura, thank you again for another awesome webinar that you brought, awesome session that you brought together, and your brilliant moderation. And for all of the great comments in the chat, I really, really appreciate these ideas. And just want to say you should be able to click, everybody's Zoom is different, I guess, but in the bottom of the chat, there's 3 little dots. You should be able to click on that and it says save chat. So you should all be able to just save the chat. We will be sending all of the resources that are associated with our session we'll be sharing, but we're not going to be sharing everything that's been posted by all of you. So I highly encourage you to see if you can go ahead and download the chat yourself. In fact, just click on those 3 little dots. And then you should I know somebody said they couldn't copy it, but you also should just be able to copy and paste into your own, document somewhere or your own notes. So again, thank you for this really, really important discussion. So I just loved all this discussion about the partnerships and the way that you're connecting early learning with K through 12 schools and districts and early learning centers, and how you're, the idea of parents as ambassadors, all these things are so important and so replicable, which is really what's important to our network. So thank you. And I definitely want to encourage everybody to please join us again. I know we've got a slide with our upcoming sessions, so please do register. I'll post the registration link again in the chat. And also please join us for sure. I posted in the chat earlier on Monday, I almost said October, on Monday, July 18th, we do have a session honoring public libraries. So all the great comments that Casey made and others made about partnering with public libraries for transition, we'll be focusing on that among many other things, many other ways that public libraries are very critical for helping us achieve our goals for early school success, grade level reading achievement, and disrupting intergenerational poverty. So that's GLR week. We have a slide on that too coming up, but please do join us next week and the week after for our upcoming sessions as well. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And again, we hope that you will join us next time. And thank you again to our panelists. Goodbye, everybody.